Police department, police department.
Hello, help,
Yes.
please.
This is 37-year-old Jimmy Allan. Jimmy just discovered his wife's body in the basement of their Michigan home. 18 minutes earlier, he placed this 911 call.
Okay, what's going on there?
She's in the basement.
Somebody called.
Pulled her up. I tried to give her CPR. I pulled her off and
The dispatcher instructed Jimmy to continue giving Amy CPR while several units rushed to the scene. Officer Ben J. Horn was the first to arrive. Despite the desperation in Jimmy's voice during the 911 call, it was eerily silent as Officer Horn approached the residence. However, as soon as the officer made himself known, Jimmy began crying out for help.
Police department, police department.
Hello, help,
Yes.
please.
Jimmy was found in the basement, sobbing over his unresponsive wife's body. As he grieved, he continued performing CPR.
How long she been down? Do you have any idea? Do you have any idea?
Can't be more than about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Oddly enough, Amy didn't have any significant injuries, except for a very faint mark near her jugular. By 8:57 p.m., more officers arrived along with several EMTs. They piled into the basement to take over Jimmy's life-saving efforts. Now that Jimmy had a moment to process what was going on, he dramatically ripped his shirt off and broke down on the basement floor. He was able to quickly compose himself and continued to observe the EMTs aiding Amy. Jimmy alternated between complete composure and emotional outbursts several times.
You want to come upstairs with me real quick? Okay.
As you can see, Jimmy seemed calm as he walked up the basement stairs, but as he entered the kitchen, he unleashed his wrath onto an unsuspecting bowl of potato chips. The officers weren't sure what to make of this erratic behavior, especially since they had no clue what led up to the discovery of Amy's body.
Did she make any statements at all?
No,
Jimmy gave the officers a quick summary of his and Amy's night. At around 6:30 p.m., the couple dropped their daughter and her friend off at a nearby high school football game and then headed downtown for some drinks. While at a bar, they got into an argument and Amy ended up walking home alone while Jimmy drove home in their car. When Amy got back home, the arguing continued, so he left her alone to cool off. He went upstairs and threw on the Jim Carrey film Ace Ventura. When it was time to pick up their daughter, he went to check on Amy again.
I was irritated and I didn't hear anything, so I went back down and checked on her.
Does Amy have a history of anything like this? Nothing in her background at all?
Ever.
Okay.
The officers found it strange that Amy would escalate things to this degree out of nowhere. But nobody seemed as shocked as Jimmy.
I'm hoping I wake up, dude.
Unfortunately for Jimmy, this was a nightmare that he wouldn't be waking up from. But suddenly, an EMT emerged from the basement with a glimmer of hope.
Huh? What?
Says she's fighting.
No.
The EMTs were able to re-establish a faint pulse, so Amy was still clinging to life. But when Jimmy realized that his wife was still breathing, he seemed frustrated by this promising news. His reaction immediately set off red flags for the officers. Jimmy then left the room momentarily to grab a new shirt, and when he came back, he called his daughter Ashley to inform her of the emergency.
We had an emergency. Don't go anywhere. There's an emergency. Don't go anywhere. I'll talk to you in a little bit.
Jimmy didn't want Ashley to panic over the phone, so he kept his composure and didn't share any details of what had happened. But right after that phone call, he called his parents and spilled his heart out.
Oh, I don't know what to do, Mom. I don't know what to do. Oh, this is terrible. I gotta talk to the cops.
Although Jimmy was crying his heart out, the officer spotted no moisture on his face at all. They decided to have him wait outside, away from the crime scene. Shortly after, Amy was placed on a stretcher and taken to the back of an ambulance. They rushed her to the ProMedica Herrick Hospital, just 2 minutes away. The EMTs were finished in the basement, so the officers headed back inside to do further investigation. Now that the dust had settled, they immediately noticed something strange. The basement ceilings were very low, so low that they began to question the logistics of Jimmy's story. Amy was 5 foot 6 inches, and the basement ceiling wasn't much higher, roughly 7 feet. But rather than jumping to conclusions, the investigators decided to wrap things up for the night. The next morning, Officer Horn and his partner returned to the Allan household to ask Jimmy some more questions. They hoped to get a better understanding of what led up to the incident. According to Jimmy, the family started their day in high spirits by making breakfast together and getting Ashley ready for school.
Just listening to music and making lunch and breakfast, smile on her face.
At around 7:30 a.m., Jimmy left for work and Ashley left for school, while Amy stayed home. Jimmy decided to leave work early, so around 12:30 p.m., he came home and took a nap. Then, at 2:45 p.m., the school day was over and it was time to pick up Ashley.
Ashley had a friend over, Kayla, after school. Amy picked her up and I was just kind of in bed. And they came here. She made everybody dinner, 6:30. We rolled out to take them to the game.
After a nice family dinner, everybody hopped in the car and drove to the Tecumseh High School for the football game. As mentioned before, Jimmy and Amy dropped off the girls and decided to head downtown to go bar hopping. They first went to Ember's Bar and Grill, then to JR's Hometown Grill and Pub shortly after. Investigators would later confirm this part of Jimmy's story by obtaining the security footage from JR's. Apparently, nothing seemed out of the ordinary until Jimmy brought up the idea of selling their house and moving down south. Since the family had just moved to Michigan from Florida 1 year earlier, Amy was not fond of this idea. She began texting someone on her phone and became dismissive of Jimmy's comments.
She said a couple of times that, oh, that's not going to work. And she's normally positive and was sort of down and negative. And we started to disagree about it. And she's like, you know, I hope that works out for you. And I'm like, what do you mean, me? I'm talking about our life. Like, and this isn't hardcore planning. This is like you talking about, you know, our future. And she just, well, I hope that works out for you.
Jimmy said that this comment sparked an argument between the two. By the time they left the bar, things were very tense. Amy decided that she would rather walk home than sit with Jimmy any longer. This was also confirmed by this surveillance footage, which captured Amy walking down the street, heading in the direction of their house. Amy arrived home at 7:58 p.m. She grabbed an extension cord and then went down to the basement. At 8:05 p.m., Jimmy decided to go check on her.
She's petting Louie, one of our cats, and what the hell are you doing in the basement?
Apparently, Amy was angry at him for slamming the door in her face as they left the bar. But according to Jimmy, it was just an accident. He did forget to hold the door for her, but he didn't slam it intentionally. Amy didn't believe that it was an accident, so she started throwing insults at him, and the two proceeded to argue for about 10 minutes. Nothing good was coming from this argument, so Jimmy went back upstairs, leaving Amy in the basement with the extension cord. About 25 minutes later, at 8:40 p.m., Jimmy realized that it was time to pick up Ashley from the football game. Before he left, he went back to the basement to squash the beef with Amy.
And immediately do that and started, you know, check for a pulse. When I glanced down there, I saw there looked like a upturned kitty litter pail.
Huh.
Because I'm like, like I said, it was just so,
Sure.
The officer asked if there were any signs that something like this might happen, but Jimmy said that he could never have seen this coming.
you know, spent all night kind of thinking and playing back what triggered what was.
Has she ever tried anything like this before?
She's never had anything ever. Like, we live a healthy lifestyle. We work out. We go rock climbing 3 times a week in Ann Arbor. We like cook meals at home. We grow our own vegetables out here. Money trouble. No, I mean, this is like the pinnacle of best job I've ever had. I make great money. She's a stay-at-home mom. She takes care of the 5 cats, the pool, and is there for my daughter doing sports and activities.
Sure.
The officer then asked if he and his partner could do a more thorough search of the home, and Jimmy agreed. With the help of their new recruit, Louie, Jimmy's cat, the officer scoured every room in the household, hoping to find any clues that could explain last night's incident. They weren't able to find any bombshell evidence, but they did collect several items that belonged to Amy, including her computer and cell phone. Following their search, Officer Horn headed back outside to speak with Ashley. She was visibly shaken up by the incident, but the detectives needed to know if Amy and Jimmy had a history of violent altercations.
Were your mom and dad fighting at all yesterday that you recall?
No, but everything was normal when I left.
When you left? Okay. Is there a history of the, like, fighting or arguing or anything like that? Nothing ever? Okay.
The officer also asked about Amy's state of mind, but Ashley said that even though her mom was a deeply introverted person, she had always been emotionally stable. This interview wasn't as fruitful as the officers had hoped, but shortly after, they were approached by several of Amy's family members. They said that Jimmy waited 14 hours to tell them about the incident. As soon as they heard the news, they rushed over to the police department because they had an abundance of useful information for the police. The investigators learned that back in 1997, when Amy was just 13, she had a son named Caleb. Her parents looked after Caleb while she attended high school in Ocala, Florida. By the end of high school, she began dating Jimmy, who had no problem becoming a father figure to Caleb. When Amy was 19, they had Ashley, and from that point on, Amy stayed home to take care of the kids while Jimmy worked. However, according to Amy's family, this wasn't her choice. They believed that Jimmy was a controlling husband who didn't want Amy to become financially independent. He would monitor everything the family did, from their social media activity to what they were eating throughout the day. He would also discipline the kids if he believed they were misbehaving, frequently taking things too far. Whenever Amy stood up to Jimmy, her opinion didn't seem to matter. Whatever Jimmy wanted, Jimmy got. So when Caleb turned 17, he left to stay with his grandparents. Jimmy retaliated, telling Amy that she was no longer allowed to speak with her family, including Caleb. One of the last times Caleb saw her was at his high school graduation a year before the incident. But other than that, Amy had minimal involvement in Caleb's life. All of this evidence was extremely damning for Jimmy. It wouldn't be a surprise if an abusive and controlling husband tried to murder his wife. But if the police wanted to bulletproof their case against Jimmy, they needed to answer one big question. What was Jimmy's motive? Unfortunately, before the investigators could answer this question, they received tragic news. On September 17, 2018, after being unresponsive for 3 days, Amy was taken off of life support and pronounced dead. With a possible homicide now on their hands, the authorities pressed on with their investigation. They decided to look for answers in Amy's cell phone. In her text with Jimmy, his controlling behavior was on full display. He had somehow been tracking Amy's every move. He would frequently text Amy her exact location and ask her why she was there. Despite all of Jimmy's torment, Amy seemed completely fine in her other conversations. This evidence strengthened the case against Jimmy, but the detectives still couldn't pinpoint an exact motive. That was until they looked through a conversation with a man named George. George was a married man from the East Coast that Amy had met online and had been texting for the past 3 years. Based on the explicit content of the messages, it was clear that they were having an affair. Even on the day of the incident, Amy and George were consistently texting and calling each other. While Amy was having dinner with her family at 5:07 p.m., George texted her saying, "I wish we could be together right now." At 5:29 p.m., Amy responded with, "I'm excited to see you again." And remember when Amy began texting somebody during the argument at JR's Grill and Pub? It turns out that she was texting George, even with Jimmy sitting directly beside her. From these findings, a new theory emerged. Perhaps Jimmy had caught a glimpse of these text conversations and was overcome with anger, which ultimately led to him attacking Amy in the basement. The investigators were eager to ask Jimmy some more questions, but they ran into a small problem. Jimmy was nowhere to be found. It turns out that just a few days after the incident, Jimmy and Ashley packed their belongings, including their 5 cats, and headed back to their hometown, Ocala, Florida, to stay with family. Thankfully, the authorities were easily able to get in touch with Jimmy to arrange another interview. He told them that he would be back in Michigan in a few weeks to grab some of his stuff. Since the Tecumseh Police Department had limited personnel and resources, the Michigan State Police had taken over the investigation, and Detective Larry Rothman was put on the case. 1 month after Amy's death, he met Jimmy at the station for a formal interview. During his stay in Florida, Jimmy had plenty of time to reflect on his relationship with Amy, and he was forthright with the detective about his shortcomings.
It wasn't so inner focused and self-focused, and maybe I could have seen some things that were going on that maybe could have clued me into what my wife was in so much turmoil that I couldn't even see it. I mean, that's how it feels. Like, I don't even know who I am.
It's hard to believe this statement from Jimmy because moments later, when asked to describe himself, he gives an awfully detailed answer.
Describe yourself. What kind of a person are you?
I would say I'm a type A personality. I like structure, organization. I'm ambitious. Always seeking to improve myself and others around me. That's why all this is so pressing to me, is because like I had really taken measures in the last couple of years to like make sure that myself, my family were like mentally fit, like mentally healthy, like pursuing things that not only get you physical, like, but helping others, being kind, making it, like I said, making the same thing, that type of person I am, making a positive impact on people.
Without a doubt, Jimmy's obsession with creating the perfect family was immensely toxic. However, Jimmy seemed to take pride in this toxic behavior, framing it as a strength. He believed that his role in the family was to hold them to a higher standard. No matter how much Jimmy painted himself as an upstanding family man, the detectives weren't buying it.
Looking back now, where you're at now, does anything pop out at you?
Yeah, there's, I mean, my wife had some issues, and
What kind of issues?
she struggled from like social anxiety. So, she's been like that for years. She's just extremely shy, introverted person. She never developed relationships. Even when we were in Ocala, she didn't have any friends. She was playing like video games compulsively, that World of Warcraft thing. That got out of hand, so she just sort of started isolating herself. And so I had taken measures when we got up here to help her break out of it.
Jimmy is painting himself as a valiant savior, guiding his wife away from her bad habits towards a healthy lifestyle. But as we mentioned earlier, everybody who was close to Amy said that Jimmy was the main cause of her isolation. While asking Jimmy about infidelity in the relationship, he revealed that Amy wasn't the only one cheating.
There was one time when I went to the Isle of Man and hooked up with this chick.
Any time during your marriage, do you know if she was unfaithful to you?
I don't think that would be possible.
Why is that?
She didn't seem to have the capacity to like talk to people, man. I mean, she was like incredibly introverted.
Clearly, Jimmy underestimated Amy's charm. Later in the interview, the detective set the record straight, bluntly telling Jimmy that Amy was in fact having an affair.
What was your knowledge of her affair?
I don't think she had an affair. To my knowledge, I have no idea. I wouldn't think it was possible.
There was a lot of stuff that she had tried to delete there, but I mean, we're talking, telling this other guy she loves him.
I think that you're bullshit.
I'm not. I'm not going to lie to you today, and I haven't. So
I'll just tell you right now, I don't believe it.
Jimmy seemed to be in denial, so the detective printed off some excerpts from Amy's conversations with George, some more risque than others.
And then the chats lead up to the 14th, the same day that this happened. Clearly there was something going on between these two people.
As someone who had a say in every aspect of Amy's life, he seemed completely blindsided by her secret life with George. He wanted more answers.
Can you pull phone records to see if there's any numbers that I could see that I don't recognize? And that's like, to me, is crushing to think that she even has some alternate life. Like, I legitimately, I still just don't all the way believe you guys. I don't think that she has the capacity to do that. Like I said, this is the most shocking, I can't even process it.
In a last-ditch effort to elicit a confession, the detective asked Jimmy if he would take a polygraph test. Jimmy agreed and maintained his innocence the entire time. Ultimately, the test results were inconclusive. The detective wrapped up the interview, less certain about Jimmy's involvement than before. Jimmy was allowed to leave, and he went back to Florida later that day. The police struggled to find any new leads, so they had no choice but to wait for the medical examiner to release Amy's autopsy report. That day finally came 3 months after Amy's death. It was confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation asphyxiation, but the manner of death was undetermined, requiring additional investigation. The ball was back in Detective Rothman's court, but finding more evidence to determine whether or not this was a homicide was easier said than done. He meticulously looked through all of the evidence, including the body cam footage. He stumbled upon the moment that Officer Horn noticed how low the basement ceiling was, and he suddenly had an idea. Rothman reached out to a forensic engineering lab in Michigan and asked them to recreate the scenario Jimmy had supposedly stumbled upon. After many months of preparation, testing, and analyzing the results, the lab determined that under the same circumstances, her feet would have made contact with the ground. A different forensic pathologist reviewed the same test results, and they determined that her manner of death must have been a homicide. On October 16, 2020, Jimmy was charged with 1 felony count of open murder. This meant that if the case went to trial, it would be up to the jury to determine the degree of homicide Jimmy is guilty of, anywhere from involuntary manslaughter to first-degree murder. By this point in the investigation, it appeared that Jimmy, who was still staying with his parents in Florida, had moved on entirely. In fact, he even had a new fiancée, and their wedding was just 5 days away. But before they could tie the knot, Jimmy was arrested and extradited back to Michigan. Once he was booked into jail, he was brought into a room to have his charges explained to him. When told that he could contact the investigators if he had any questions, Jimmy said something peculiar.
If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of us, or they can contact us. Okay?
Just how you sleep at night.
Well, I guess I don't understand that question.
Okay.
A few weeks later, at his arraignment hearing, Jimmy pled not guilty. His bond was set at $10 million, and he was put behind bars. Leading up to his trial, his defense attorney Daniel Guerin released this statement. Mr. Allan vehemently asserts his innocence in this case, as he had absolutely nothing to do with Amy Allan's tragic death. He cooperated with police throughout the 2-year investigation and provided evidence and statements showing his innocence from the very beginning. He has been in jail for nearly a year for a crime he did not commit, and he misses his family dearly. He is looking forward to the evidence finally being shown to a jury of his peers so they can see clearly that he is innocent and did absolutely nothing wrong. In September of 2021, 3 years after Amy's death, his trial began. Prosecutor Angie Borders kicked off the opening statements. She said that her team was confident that the evidence would point the jury to a guilty verdict. Defense attorney Daniel Guerin delivered the defense's opening statement, saying that there was no substantial evidence to support the prosecution's theory, and their case did not add up.
The people want you to believe that Jimmy Allan, for reasons nobody explains or guesses or understands why, snaps after 15 years of marriage, brutally kills his wife, goes up into cover-up mode, does all of this cover-up, and then gets the police there at 8:52 to start showing them evidence of this hanging.
They also pointed to Jimmy's search history that night, suggesting that murder was the last thing on Jimmy's mind.
The phone searches they get from Jimmy's phone that shows that he's looking at searches for Jim Carrey movies and other Showtime shows, the exact shows that he had told police that night that he had watched.
One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was Amy's son Caleb. He told the court about an altercation with Jimmy while he still lived at home.
I stood up, pushed him against the wall, and there was a second of fear that came over me, and I realized what I was doing, and I let up, and then I was spun around, or maybe I turned around, and then I was choked from behind on the floor for multiple seconds. It felt like forever during the incident, and I was gasping for air, grabbing for anything, trying to get away from him.
This story suggested that Jimmy had a history of choking people when he got angry. If he was willing to choke Caleb, it's reasonable to assume that he was willing to choke Amy as well. Several witnesses that were at the scene that night were also called to the stand, including first responders and neighbors. They all testified that Jimmy's over-the-top reactions seemed like he was putting on an act. Jimmy's behavior throughout the body cam footage supported this. There were several moments where he would be sobbing uncontrollably, but would instantly compose himself to answer the officer's questions.
I gotta talk to the cops.
On top of Jimmy's questionable behavior, Officer Horn also noted that Amy's injuries did not align with Jimmy's story.
I was definitely looking for any injuries, whether it be from a hang or otherwise, and I really didn't see any sort of the typical injuries that I would normally would have seen in a So I definitely took note of that.
Later in the trial, a hospital staff member that treated Amy agreed with Officer Horn's observations, saying that the lack of external injuries suggested foul play.
No visible injuries.
No visible injuries. Is that strike you as odd?
It was a red flag.
One witness that nobody expected was none other than Mystery Man George.
And was there occasions where you came to know a person like Amy Allan on the internet?
Yes, we spoke online often. We talked about life. We also, there was a little bit of sexual content. That's what we talked about.
For the most part, George and Amy communicated through text and video calls. But the more they got to know each other, the more eager they were to see each other in person.
Now, had you ever met Amy in person?
Yes, twice.
The first time the two met up was in spring of 2017 to grab some coffee. The second time was several months later when Amy met George in a hotel room.
I was here for work, and she had some free time, so she came to the hotel.
So you're at a hotel?
Yes.
Did things that happen at a hotel happen at that hotel?
Some things, yes.
Apparently, George and Amy's love for each other only grew as time went on. Even on the day of her death, Amy showed no signs of wanting to slow down.
I wrote, I love you. And I wrote, I want more of you. And she wrote, I love you too. I'm ready to spend time with you in person. And I wrote, good. Let's do it. And then she wrote, end of October. And I wrote, I'm in.
Dr. Elizabeth Buck also played a crucial role in the prosecution's case. During her testimony, she took the jury through the extension cord experiment we mentioned earlier.
The first question that Detective Rothman asked was, can an extension cord suspend 140 pounds? The testing was performed. The answer is no.
According to the prosecution, the results of her tests were more than enough to debunk Jimmy's story. When it was the defense's turn to call witnesses, they had Jimmy's father testify. According to him, Jimmy didn't flee the state because he was guilty. It was because Jimmy's family urged him to stay with them in Florida.
He seemed somewhat composed, but totally shattered, and almost empty, if you would. I'd never seen him like that before or since. He was almost non-responsive. He seemed to have lost interest in anything.
Ashley also testified on her father's behalf. The day after the incident, she had said that her mother had always been stable. But now, 3 years later, her story had completely changed.
Did you notice anything from your vantage point that was a problem that behaviors or issues that you saw when your mom was drinking alcohol?
Two things, yes. My mother overindulged in alcohol frequently, and she became intoxicated very easily and frequently as well, which would cause her to be not herself at all. She would be meaner and more violent.
When Amy was placed under intensive care, her blood alcohol content was recorded at 0.09%, likely caused by the 2 or 3 drinks that she consumed at the bars that night. The defense said that this was proof of Amy's drinking problem and that she wasn't as chipper as the prosecution had suggested. They also questioned the forensic pathologist who claimed that this was a homicide. To dispute this notion, the defense had actually reached out to their own expert, Dr. Francisco J. Diaz. According to Dr. Diaz, since there was minimal bleeding to the strap muscles of the neck, no petechiae, and no evidence of defensive-type injuries, he believed that Amy's death was not the result of somebody else's actions. The defense had called all of their witnesses, but they had a lot more to say in their closing arguments. They said that the prosecution's case was utter speculation, and the fact that Jimmy had 0 defensive marks on him was proof of that.
Anyone puts you in a chokehold, you're going to scratch the you-know-what out of his arms. Because you're fighting for life, you're fighting for that air hunger, and you're trying to stay alive.
They also said that even though Amy and George's relationship seemed to be flourishing, it was actually just a fantasy, an escape from the dejected state of mind that plagued Amy's life.
You know, the people want to say this was sort of this thing she was looking forward to break free. It was 3 years. 3 years, and they have 3 years to meet, and they meet one time for 2 hours. She was not talking to her family. She was isolated. She didn't have a job. She was socially anxious. And that is not to beat up Amy Allan. It is to tell you that she was living sort of a double parallel life. And we believe the fuse was lit. And we had, unfortunately, isolation, drinking, odd behavior, the guilt of a very graphic and long-term affair, unbeknownst to Jimmy and his daughter, that ultimately led to her very sad and tragic death on Friday, September 14th of 2018.
Both sides rested their case. Jimmy's fate was now in the hands of the jury. After about 6 hours of deliberations, they had their verdict.
You do say upon your oaths that you find the defendant guilty of the lesser offense of second-degree murder.
After this verdict, Jimmy didn't seem to know what to do with himself. He wandered aimlessly for a bit, and when it was time to be booked into the jail, he bashfully waved goodbye to his family. On October 21st, 2021, Jimmy was sentenced to 20 to 45 years in prison in the Michigan Department of Corrections. He currently resides at the St. Louis Correctional Facility and will be eligible for parole in the year 2040.